James Steinville on the Health and Wellness Channel on TVU with Tara Boothby, registered psychologist. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. James and I have already been teasing each other a fair bit this morning, so that's lovely.
It is. It's good. It's good. It's nice to have that kind of interaction. So we talked about and are going to take on relationships.
Yes.
Okay. So where do we start? Subjectively, objectively, what do you want to do?
Well, I think so. For me, I am a certified emotionally focused therapist and supervisor as well. So I actually support other psychologists in the community to become certified with this model. And the emotion focused therapy model is for couples, it's for individuals, and it's for family. But with couples in particular, it is really designed to help us get underneath the content that gets us into trouble and helps couples, partners access the more vulnerable emotions so that we can talk about what we really need to talk about rather than did you put the dishes away or did you pay the bills, those sorts of content that we tend to get up into the same old argument about.
Okay, so that's a interesting overview. I imagine there's all sorts of flux and machinery that works within that. So where do you kind of pick up this story of relationship? You know, when relationships are not super broken, so they're done and nobody wants to fix them, but you know, a little bit underwater. You know, what do you normally see?
Right. So that's a great question. Actually, I had Sue Johnson on my YouTube, Instagram, Facebook a few weeks ago, who is the founder of this model. But really with Sue's design or how she has pictured it is like there's this cycle, this infinity loop that goes between couples. And when we're stuck in our escalation, it feels like this never-ending loop. And actually, a common thing that we might say is it's like we're having the same argument over and over again. So whether we're arguing about did you feed the dog or did you do the dishes or pay the bills, the emotion, the heat of the conflict always feels similar. Now with the infinity loop, it's like two people on either side. And there is a very real connection inward for each of us. So there's a behavior that we're going to see on the top of the cycle, and that's lots of times what gets us into trouble. And then there's some beliefs or meanings that we have that's driving that behavior. How I perceive the world around me, or how I perceive myself, how I perceive my person. And then there's the more obvious emotions, which might be anger, frustration, panic or anxiety, more of those harder feelings, again, that can get us into more trouble. Underneath the surface, so that's the top of the infinity loop, but underneath the infinity loop, there's more primary emotions, which oftentimes include something like sadness, fear, pain, more of those softer, vulnerable feelings that we have a hard time exposing. And further down, then we have our attachment fears and our attachment needs. This is really at the root, and the root of emotion-focused therapy is all about our attachment. Those deep down longings, that longing to be known, longing to be heard, longing to be seen, and some version of that for each of us might show up as a fear of failure, a fear of abandonment, a fear of never being good enough, or always alone. It's our flavor of alone, actually, at the core. It's quite a sacred place to notice with people.
But it's interesting that you said that accompanied with that, even though in that sacredness of that aloneness, there's the fear of abandonment and the fear of failure. So those are probably, from my personal experience, being a man and, past my middle 50s, there's a male decline thing where fear of, actualization of failure and actualization of abandonment just because of the position in life. And now to have that as closest to loneliness. So that's got to be something really difficult with the men coming in with their wives and family to unravel that. How do you do that for someone in their midlife?
Yeah, and I mean, it makes sense to have a man identify with the fear of failure. That might be a common fear that a fellow might notice, is this like, I really want to get it right for my family. And so that fear of failure connects up to maybe some pain that has informed that fear for an entire lifetime. Long before you or I knew our spouse, we knew these fears, these needs, these longings inside of us. So when my fear gets activated, everything gets really big, gets going really quickly. And I don't want to show my fear because that's unbelievable. That's so vulnerable to notice. So then maybe some frustration shows up. And I perceive things like, oh, here we go again, or you're just going to tell me what to do. You're so critical, whatever that perception might be way up on the surface. People don't understand me. And then the behavior gets me going. So that might be like walking away, shutting down. It might be criticism or stonewalling. So John Gottman has these 4 categories of behaviors that we can get us into trouble: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And usually our behavior fits into those categories, and we can personalize it for each one of us. My stonewalling will look different than someone else's stonewalling.
So then, again, in all of that, that is very sophisticated awareness, and having people come on in, their commitment to transparency and vulnerability in that process would be the highest gradient of their success with it. So in that situation where couples are dealing with each other, and the man is the fellow, I like that pronoun, good, has the failure, which would attach to provision, which would trigger his wife's partner fear in her. And then if he's feeling alone, that would have a social aspect. So not that he's the only thing that's causing her to be in that situation, but that would heap onto her those kind of things. So what kind of things are triggering back? Like, what kind of things are the gals up to that are making the fellows trigger?
Yeah, you're getting it. That's the infinity loop, right? So if, let's say, and we could say in a heterosexual relationship, we're sort of using that metaphor right now, right, of a male partner and a female partner, but it's true for same-sex couples as well, that there is an infinity loop that is happening between the two people. So the behavior, let's say the husband in this little couple we've made up, he is stonewalling. So that whatever he does, he walks away, he goes to his office, he goes to the garage, and wife sees that, and it zings her right at her core, at her attachment, fear, or need. Right. There he goes, and her perception, there he goes again, walking away. So it happens very quickly. It's like, I'm abandoned, I'm alone, and there's some of that despair emotion, that primary suffering. And the secondary, the more obvious emotion might look like anger or something, because there he goes again. There's this self-talk that reinforces the belief of why this is happening to me. And then her behavior, maybe she gets critical and she says something like, all you do is walk away, which might be something that a woman or a person who sees their partner continually stonewall, that they would say that makes sense, because I'm protesting. I want you near me. And what's interesting is a more verbal partner is typically going to say something that could come across critical or contemptuous, because they are trying to have connection. It's a bid. But in my panic and in my fear, I don't want to show my vulnerability. That harder emotion comes across wrong, but really I'm just trying to reach for you. As the husband that's walked away and he's in the garage is also trying to protect the relationship. So he's saying, okay, this is getting hot and I don't want us to have a fight because I just don't know what to do with that. So I'll walk away because then maybe this fight won't happen and we'll be okay. So everybody is actually trying. There's a positive intention on both sides. But our behavior, when it's unchecked, gets us into trouble.
It's the, because both behaviors, him being alone, going alone, make her feel more alone, which makes him feel more alone. But I like, and that's that escalation that can just, and cause, a calloused relationship. But I like how you're saying, how you pointed out that that's good though, because he's trying to protect the relationship. She's feeling sensitive in that relationship. So it's actually a good place to be in. It's so good.
Yeah, it's true. And there is, both of them are trying. I feel this empathy for either side. Like I do feel empathy for the more verbal partner because they look like, like their words are getting them into trouble. They say more. And so then we can be more judgmental of that person. Whereas the person who's withdrawing and walking away, their words aren't getting them into as much trouble. But they're both frightened. And there's a few words that are really key in this. And deep down at our depth in our attachment needs and longing and close to that fear, those painful emotions, there's words that we identify with, which are shame, blame, guilt, and humiliation. So there's this stuff that's informing these old fears about our ability to be in connection with other people. And that's where shame, blame, guilt, and humiliation comes up. And so, unfortunately, either one of us, and it's not static. None of this is static. And there's, an absolute formula for men or women or this or that. We're all like different flavors of the same. But if we have endured more shame or more humiliation, we might actually use more shame or humiliation towards our person or just towards ourselves. Whereas if we have endured more blame and guilt, we might use more blame and guilt or direct it more to ourselves.
So then, you have a very high level of awareness. So people, when they come in, they can feel pretty comfortable that they can be themselves. It's probably best for them to be more themselves and how they're actually dealing with each other, because then you can see these things and help them unpack them. As a young man, I went through like really young. Went through a marriage breakup and a family breakup, and it was really hard for me. But I identified a cycle: guilt, blame, anger, and I could feel it run in me. But you provided a very interesting breakout of that. So you had guilt, blame, where I had anger. You have shame and humiliation. So I now understand that anger was a reaction to, it was actually guilt, blame, shame, humiliation, and my reaction was anger to that. So that was a win for me.
With anger is an emotion that gets in a lot of trouble. So we like to judge anger in particular. Anger can show up on the top of our cycle here, and it's a real protest. This is uncomfortable. But then there's also this deeper righteous anger that is much more painful and fragile. It's more vulnerable. So even in a divorce, there's a lot of that vulnerable, unjust anger. And we might have visible anger as well. We might not.
Yeah. And you do grow out of it, like I was 22 at the time, I'm 57. I can remember it, but I remember it, remember growing out of it. As I grew forward and, met someone new, had a family, those kind of things go away. But that was good. So what kind of wins do people, what kind of success in this do people, they come in, they're going into this new kind of therapy. They're trembling many times, but they probably even sit real close together finally for the first time in a long time when they come. But so it's good. What kind of things normally do they get success with on the first time that they come through these sessions?
Well, it's a little tricky, but I think in the first session, really, I'm trying to get to know the couple, and they're teaching me who they are, and I am working on like mapping out that cycle.
Right.
So I'm starting to notice that cycle with them. So hopefully they're going to hear me or an emotionally focused therapist be able to piece together some semblance of what that infinity loop is looking like when escalation shows up. And going forward, then what really helps me or other emotionally focused therapists is then we do an individual with each partner so that I can get a better sense of our alliance and connection, and then also I can understand more of the attachment story. So we have this thing that we do in our emotion focused couples therapy where we want to seed attachment. And what that means is we really want to make things come alive, that there is this whole world that has informed me in this moment. And again, long before you knew your current partner, you know, you had this breakdown when you're 22 years old. I mean, like, should we even let 22-year-olds get married? Or right? Like, you're so
It was a
young.
different era, though. I am old, right?
Yeah,
So.
but even still, it's like we're just so young back then, and
I know.
you know, it's this beautiful trauma to learn from, but then it also haunts us. There's a haunting with such a painful rupture. And then we have other things that haunt us that go back to childhood, like even the idea of being a provider. Well, that came somewhere that was informed by somebody who really said, like, this is what it looks like to be a man. And if you're not doing this, then shame on you. You know, so there's then in conflict with our person, all that stuff is in the backgrounds. And that's why it gets feeling so vulnerable. And that's why we want to stay up on the top of the surface, far away from all that. It's too hard. It's too hard to make sense of.
There's lots to, you know, I don't know how, like none of my kind of realizations as a human being, I think, are necessarily anything related to psychological theory or research. But everything that I've brought up, I'm feeling very comfortable. So I have a lot more to talk about next time. So I look forward to it. And I do appreciate your time. We've had Tara Boothby, registered psychologist, emotionally focused therapist, with us today on the Health and Wellness Channel, TVU. Thank you, Tara.
You're so welcome.